Okay, so we're gonna take a look at our vermicompost bin, our 3-layer homemade vermicompost bin, and then give it some more food and add some newspaper, shredded newspaper to kind of top off the bedding because it's getting a little low, and you might be able to, maybe you can't tell, but it is a little bit moist. So we could just add it dry, which will be great. It'll help absorb the moisture. Maybe on the lid you can tell more how shiny it is. It's pretty moist there, but let's kind of look in it. So I put a bunch of avocado shells in there. They eat the inside okay. There are like little mites or whatever that help digest and break down the material. They don't hurt the worms. They're like little red guys, but if there's a lot of extra food that the worms can't process, then you'll see them, but otherwise the population kind of declines as the food source gets consumed. So I don't worry about them, but these have a hard time kind of breaking up, but I think they're still nutritious and they'll break down in time. They kind of snap and stuff. Okay, and also I'm just gonna harvest a little bit just to feed these guys. So a lot of people say that you don't really have to really, I guess, feed your house plants, but they're plants and they're in a pot, so they don't get their nutrients from other sources. And whenever I was feeding my plants, I was a little overkill. I would add a little bit of vermicompost, at least monthly, but I was watering them weekly. They really enjoyed that process. You can see all the baby worms, those little white squiggles in here. I'm not really gonna worry about this too much. They'll probably, unfortunately, die in the pot because I'm not being very consistent with the moisture content. But they might survive in the pot, who knows? And if they do, then they'll just have their own little environment in the home of the little plant. So best of luck to you little guys. There are a lot of babies. I'm pretty excited to see that. Oh, you're not a baby. I can actually get you out, save you. But there's quite a lot, and it's very wet. You don't necessarily want it to be this wet, but it's not like they're drowning or anything. They still have some good oxygen and everything. So I'll just take some of this out and harvest it for my 2 little plants so far. I'll do a better job of it another time, but I'll fish out the worms that I can. I obviously am not going to try to save the babies because, you know, I don't want to grab them, and there's there's a lot of them. That's pretty exciting. So, okay. So I just kind of scooted most of the material over, just because so sometimes you can start on one side of the bin and feed them on this side, let them process this material mostly, and then kind of slowly work your way over. That way you can do it in a pattern. This is a very small bin, as you can see, so I don't do that, but I could definitely do that. So worms really like leafy greens, fruits, so like banana peels are really good. They're pretty slow on eating them, but they do digest them fully, except for like the stem. Broccoli they do enjoy, but they're a little slow to process them sometimes. So if you put a big head of broccoli in there, then it'll stink. I think brassicas tend to have an a very strong odor if they're not processed quickly enough. As you can see, there's not very much food in here, so they're pretty hungry. So last time I put a couple of broccoli stalks in, they ate it quickly. So I'm just gonna put some of those in. Obviously, the harder the material, the longer it is for them to digest, because it's really not them. They don't have teeth. That's why they need what's called grit, or tiny little particles of either sand or eggshells, or I think coffee grounds, which they do eat coffee grounds as well. But again, if you put too much in one spot, then it can be hard for them to get to fully, and then you can get some mold and stuff, which is totally fine. It won't harm the worms, but it will produce an odor, and you don't really want to inhale it. But the leaves, they eat pretty quickly, but if you put like hard stems or anything in there, then that'll take longer to process. So just keep that in mind when you're feeding the bin. So I'm gonna sprinkle some coffee grounds in. So, and then I'll add more leaves. And you can even add like sourdough discard, but just be cautious when doing that, because the moisture can become too much for the bin. I wouldn't really want to do that right now because my bin is quite moist already. But now I'm just going to take some dry newspaper shredding and place them on top. So these I actually got in the junk mail. These are like the store, grocery store, whatever's that they send in the mail to a lot of people. I just save them, and I make sure I only get the paper ones. So typically you're not supposed to use colored newspaper because the ink can be toxic, but I've had no issues with my worms with the colored ink, so I'm not too concerned about it. But if you're like being very specific or doing a certified organic garden or something like that, then you definitely want to be cautious of what you put in. I obviously put in store-bought food scraps, and I don't always buy organic, so I mean it's already not fully organic anyway, but I haven't had any problems with it. The alternative is you can like soak it in water overnight and let any chemicals that are in it be soaked out, and then you dump the water and then put the material in the worm bin. But I haven't had any issues, so, and I have done it before. It makes quite a bit of a mess, and also it doesn't help absorb any moisture. I like this method because all these newspapers that's dry, it'll absorb all the extra moisture. Okay, layer 2 I've emptied quite a bit. I'm not sure, I think I just want to kind of take it out, but there are worms in here. I don't really want to deal with it right now. And then layer 3, these are the roses. They're molding because they're not being digested very quickly, but that's totally fine. It just has an odor, and again, you don't really want to inhale it. So I might leave this layer alone, but I could add some extra newspaper, but I'm just gonna let it be. And then let's always check that bottom layer with it. This is just the catch all. So notice how there's no liquid in here. So some people mistakenly think that the worm bin should produce a liquid, and then it that is called worm tea. That is incorrect. If there is a liquid coming out of the bottom of your worm bin, that just means you're giving it too much water. So you don't want that. So mine is moist, but I know it's not drowning my worms because there's no liquid dripping out of the bottom. Worm tea is made by soaking vermicompost in essentially like a tea bag of cloth and soaking it in a bucket of water, preferably with aeration, for about 24 hours or so. So that wouldn't give you worm tea. The stuff, any fluid that comes out of the bottom is just extra moisture that shows that you're putting too much water in your worm bin. So some of the worms like to go under there. I don't really know why, but I just kind of rescue them, put them in a different layer. Obviously, I'm not going to try to put them on top of the dry stuff because they're going to have to dig through a lot of dry stuff to get to the bottom, or get to the actual food, and I don't want them to dry out and die. I also don't want to squish them when I set this bin in because it's a heavy bin, so I'm gonna wish them luck mostly, but maybe move them around a little bit. But if they get squished, then I do apologize, worms. That's not my intention. Okay. Okay, so I just sprinkled some used coffee grounds on top. And yeah, so worms don't actually chew up and eat the food components. They rely on microbes to break down the material. That's why I don't mind whenever I have those mites in there, because the worms can't digest the materials or can't break up the materials themselves sometimes, especially some of the harder materials. So other organisms kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting for the worms. So just keep that in mind. And if you're giving something that is a little bit harder for them to digest quickly, then just put less of it in, and more soft foods. You can always tear it up yourself. I find that's more work than I'm willing to put in, so I just don't. And as long as the worms are not crawling out and trying to escape, then you're totally fine. They're happy, and they have not been trying to climb out of my worm bin. They just climb into the bottom bin, which is totally fine. I've had unhappy worms before, and they climb out of your bin. So you'll find around your bin, you'll find little dried worms that have tried to find a better home and failed because they're indoors. But they are happy here, so I know that the conditions are good. They're moist but not dripping out the bottom. So Spiky, this is gross. You don't, no, this is gross worm food. Nope, you don't want that. That's gross. I freeze my worm food, and Spike likes to eat the vermicompost. No. So I don't want him to. But anyway, freeze the food. It helps with giving your food more moisture, and it even bursts the cells of the vegetables or vegetation, so that when they do thaw, they'll break down faster and be more mushy. So it's up to you if you want to freeze them. It also can kill any pathogen or any critters that have hitched a ride, like fruit flies or whatever. It can kill off those, so you're not introducing fruit flies into your vermicompost bin. Okay, so I just grabbed some vermicompost, and I'm just gonna add it to my pothos here. And I got some avocado skin as well. I'm just gonna sprinkle it on the top. The worms will, if they survive, which would be great, then I might break that up a little bit, but they'll eat the components in the soil, anything that can break down, I guess. You really can't add too much vermicompost, but I will say that at one point I was not wanting to spend money on any garden products, and so I didn't want to buy any soil or anything to make soil with, but I had my vermicompost bin, so I tried to grow a plant with just the vermicompost, and it's not the best idea because when it dries, it gets all hard and crusty, and it just doesn't support the plant growth. It was hard as a rock. So, but sprinkling a little bit on the top is great. If you mix it into the top layer of the soil, that's even better. And then I'll just kind of water it in at another time. And then this is the snake plant. Okay, and the cool thing about the snake plant is it's a succulent. So succulents and cacti and a couple of other plants breathe carbon dioxide at night as well. So most plants need to breathe oxygen at night, but because of whatever photosynthesis succulents can do in the dark, they emit oxygen at night. So I think that's really cool, but I'll water that in, make them nice and happy. So if I do this regularly, then they'll definitely thank me for it and produce a lot of extra leaves and growth and everything. So that's feeding my little house plant. And just to let you know, I bought the plant this big, this snake plant. So yeah, I'm hoping to propagate it, but I haven't really been dealing with the house plants all that much.